Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. That's the main man, Greg. I'm Buck Rising. If you're just now jumping onto the podcast, we're happy to have you. And we are getting a lot of new people, Greg, here as we get ready for another football season. So it's always nice to welcome new folks into the fold. And today, as we continue to look around the NFL and OTAs underway across the league at this point, we were planning to look at the NFC South today specifically. I did want to jump into, Greg, quickly, though, since we do have OTA stuff going on. Just
Yeah.
coming off of practice yesterday, got the opportunity to watch Cam Ward with the veterans. There's no contact, there's no pads necessarily, but it is the first time that in what they call phase 3 of the offseason in the NFL that we are seeing legitimate competition. And I've really enjoyed watching him both compete, kind of get his feet under him, and also to talk to the vets about working with him has been pretty revelatory. He seems, not like they're not gonna say anything bad publicly, especially at this time of year, but it is noticeable the what they are saying after practice versus what you're seeing from them during practice. It seems like it's meshing pretty well here.
Yeah. And I would think that just again, what I found out about Cam Ward from people at Washington State, that all those things would be positive. And I'm sure if you get a chance to see a little of the practice, as you probably did, that you can see he throws a beautiful ball. I mean, it comes out easily. He's just a pretty thrower. So there's are they trying to present, just out of curiosity, are they trying to present it as a quarterback competition, or is Cam Ward the starter?
They are trying to present it as a quarterback competition because they are trying to rehab essentially Will Levis's image for somebody who may not be in love with their quarterback room by the end of preseason, let's say, and might be shopping around for other options.
Yeah, and I know that Will Levis spent time this offseason with Jordan Palmer, and I know Jordan pretty well, and I know he does a phenomenal job. So I'm sure that there are some things that were clearly worked on that he probably is looking a little better. You're there, I'm not, but I would think, look, you draft Cam Ward number one, barring anything unforeseen, he's your starting quarterback.
Agreed. And, we need Will Levis, at least the Titans need Will Levis to stop throwing interceptions that are being publicized at practice like he did to end practice yesterday. But, a conversation for another day. Speaking of teams that are in need of quarterbacks, though, Greg, I don't know if New Orleans and Kellen Moore are going to be interested in adding a player like Will Levis, but they are
Right.
in a pretty unique situation with the Derek Carr injury and then retirement. They draft Tyler Shuck in the second round to add to their quarterback room. They have Spencer Rattler, but Jake Haener got injured and is not expected to be back until training camp. And the Saints are.
Yeah.
I wonder what you make of the Saints as a whole right now, as you look at what they did in free agency and as well as in the draft, because they seem to be one of these teams stuck in purgatory as much as any
Yeah.
other. Kelvin Banks, their first round pick to go with Shuck, and then a handful of other guys that have some interesting appeal here, but it's a tough spot for this roster and this coaching staff to be in.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw again. I don't put a lot of stake in what is said now. I mean, we're at the end of May. There's so much more to go. Miles to go before we sleep, as it were.
Mm.
And people are talking about the Saints as if they're really bad. Just in terms of their roster. I don't quite see it that way. Look, obviously, they've got a question mark right now at the quarterback position. They drafted Tyler Shuck, I believe, with the 40th pick in the draft. So they didn't draft him with the idea that, oh, we just drafted a backup. They drafted him with the idea that he could well be the starting quarterback. You and I have no idea what Kellen Moore thought of Spencer Rattler when he came out the year prior, because Kellen Moore was not with the Saints and he was with the Eagles. And obviously, I'm sure he studied Spencer Rattler. All offensive coordinators look at all the quarterbacks, but we have no idea. So they obviously like Tyler Shuck, or they wouldn't have drafted him where they did. The thing that we don't know is whether they're totally comfortable saying, hey, you know what? Rookie head coach, new staff. We love Tyler Shuck. We are going to, ride with him. It's our guy. Now, Rattler is probably one of the most fascinating fifth round picks, because he was the number one recruited quarterback coming out of high school, had a phenomenal true freshman season at Oklahoma. And obviously, then Caleb Williams came in. He moved to South Carolina, where he was up and down behind a terrible O line. but he throws a beautiful ball, a beautiful ball. He's an easy thrower. So that's probably a legit uh, competition. But this is not a terrible roster, Buck. I don't know why people think they're a really bad team. This is not a terrible roster by any means.
I think people put so much stock in just the quarterback uncertainty, right? They don't
Yeah,
know anything about, or at least the public, right? Obviously, the NFL
right.
and the people who are tasked with scouting know about Tyler Shuck and what he might bring to a team. And Kelvin Banks is an interesting figure in here as well, with them not picking up the fifth-year option on Trevor Penning as they work through some offensive line situations. But Kelvin Banks, I know he has a couple of different things that are appealing, certainly. And I think a lot of people, depending on who you like and what your preferences are and how you go about the scouting process, may have even thought of him as the best offensive tackle in this draft class, given
Yeah.
that he doesn't have the arm length limitations that Will Campbell, for example, does, who went fourth to the Patriots.
Yeah, I like Banks coming out. I mean, to me, he's a left tackle. I know a lot of people said, well, maybe he's a guard. I thought he was a left tackle. I think he's athletic enough. I don't think there's an issue there. We've talked numerous times that the true litmus test for tackles, people still think of left tackle as more important than right tackle, but the true litmus test for tackles in this league is, can they pass protect one on third down and in pure pass situations? Because no offensive coach wants to have to keep a tight end or a back in, even to chip. They want to send five out as primary receiving dimensions for the quarterback. And I think Kelvin Banks can do that. You could make the argument, given what Fuaga did, who was their first round pick a year ago out of Oregon State, who played left tackle last year for the Saints after playing right tackle in his 2 years at Oregon State. He's now moved back to right tackle. So you could argue that if Banks turns out to be a good player and they drafted him in the top 10, so let's assume he'll be a good player, that they have a young, really good tackle tandem. Eric McCoy's a quality center. Cesar Ruiz is a quality right guard. They're looking at a left guard. I mean, they signed Dylan Ray, and I'd be very surprised if he wins the job. But that's four out of their five offensive linemen are probably going to be pretty good players.
Yeah, and certainly they're going to need that because again, to the untrained eye, Greg, it just seems like Tyler Shuck and muddy pockets don't necessarily mix, even though he does have some traits that obviously he
Yeah,
brings to the table that can continue to be developed. But that's the case for any quarterback, obviously,
and
regardless.
I think that's yeah, it's rare. Let's put it this way: it's rare in college football with the nature of offenses that you see quarterbacks having to work on meaningful snaps out of money pockets. So most quarterbacks have to kind of work through that to some extent, some more than others, obviously. But defensively, Buck, they're not, they still have players. I mean, again, you're right, and it's the quarterback. If they truly end up with average to poor quarterback play, a lot of the other things sort of fall by the wayside because then you don't score, and that's a problem. But their roster is not it's not like the 32nd roster in the NFL. If you just look at their overall roster.
For sure, that is, and Kellen Moore is an interesting figure in all this. I'd be curious to
Yep.
see how he goes about the deployment of his offense, given what he's run both, in many previous stops. Most recently, Philadelphia is their OC. Let's go to the division winner last year, Greg. Tampa can't stop adding wide receivers, and they did so in the first
No.
round with Emeka Ibuka. It's just unfair, the wide receiver core that Baker Mayfield has. They do lose Liam Cohen, though, who is, again, an interesting figure, another offensive
Yep.
play caller going on to be a head coach in Jacksonville here in the AFC South. The rest of the draft class, Benjamin Morrison, the Notre Dame corner, Jacob Parrish, another corner out of K-State, David Walker, the
Yep.
edge rusher out of Central Arkansas, another edge guy in Elijah Roberts, and then seventh round, Tez Johnson, the Oregon wide receiver, who had size
Uh,
concerns, of course,
yeah.
but just generally the state of Tampa Bay, where Baker Mayfield was at last year, and how you see some of these pieces and parts fitting together.
Yeah, I guess you never know when there's a coordinator change like that because Liam Cohen is one of the best in the league, in my view, anyway. So that's hard to know. Obviously, I'm not breaking down every single play call and those kinds of things, but he's really good, and schematically, he's really good. I would imagine schematically, you're not going to see meaningful changes. Baker. The thing about Baker, and because of his personality, and because he seemed to get bigger than his play deserved with all his commercials for those years.
Mm.
But Baker Mayfield had a really good year last year. He's been very good in Tampa. You talk to people and they'll tell you he's one of the best throwers in the league. People don't think of him like that, Buck, but he's one of the really good throwers in this league. He's a talented kid. And you got to figure that he's matured. He plays like he's matured now, and they've got a lot of good players. They've got an offensive line that's everybody's back. So there's no changes on their whole line. It's good. They've got a really nice running back tandem with Irving and White. We saw what Irving did last year, and White's a really nice player as well for what he does. My guess is they drafted Ibuka at 19. They probably had him as a top 10 player on their board. That would be my guess. And they just got to 19 and said, you know what? We're drafting a top 10 player. It doesn't matter the position. We're drafting a top 10 player. They are really loaded a wideout because Jalen McMillan right now is not even viewed as a starter. And again, we'll see how all that plays out. But I think he's a really good player as well. Defensively, pretty much, there'll be some changes. I mean, obviously Hassan Reddick is there now, but it's a lot of the same people. So, this is they're an interesting team. They're a solid football team. I'm curious as to the Jacob Parrish pick. And when you draft a player at number 3, third round, that's not a throwaway pick. And to me, he's a slot corner in the NFL. And I did not personally think Tyke Smith was a slot corner when he came out of Georgia. And I know he played there some for the Bucs last year. So I think that'll be a competition.
Yeah, and Todd Bowles, obviously a veteran coach, veteran defensive mind.
Yeah.
Tampa just as an organization, a program, year in, year out, really seems to have a good grasp on who they want to be and how they're going to compete within a division that a lot of people think is maybe not one of the best in the NFL, but still finds ways to put together some fun games. Which brings us to the Carolina Panthers, Greg. And obviously, I know
Yeah.
Carolina didn't make the matchup show very often last year,
Not
but
a
it was
lot. No, no.
reasonably so. But it was a
Yeah.
tale of two halves for Carolina, from the early
Yeah.
benching of Bryce Young to the injury that knocked Dalton back out of the lineup, and then kind of a rejuvenation of that football team, specifically on the offensive line, and from Bryce Young as well, which, of course, symbiotic relationship there. They add Tet McMillan, a big body wide receiver, to highlight their draft class. A couple of different edge players in the second and third round. Nick Scourton out of Texas A&M, and Princely I'm going to butcher it, but Princely
We'll call him Princely.
Princely's fine. Out
Yeah.
of Ole Miss. I wonder what you make of Princely's tape specifically, Greg. I know you watched him. Because
I watched him. Yeah.
he was somebody who seemed to have, a polarizing player in this draft class, let's say.
Yeah, that surprised me. I watched him last summer at Florida, and then of course he transferred to Ole Miss. There's a perfect example of a guy that can bend the edge. I mean, probably needs to get a little stronger, but there's no question this guy's got bend. He's got flexibility. He's explosive off the ball. He's a pure edge rusher. That's what Princely is. Their defense is kind of interesting. They brought in a lot of players on that defensive front, and they're going to get Derek Brown back. So this may not be a bad defensive front at all. I mean, guys like Tershawn Wharton, who, obviously was with Kansas City, and he always seemed to show up. Patrick Jones, they brought in from Minnesota. Interesting player as well, multi-positional along that front. I think they probably need to be a little more athletic at the linebacker position. We'll see how that all plays out. And I think, J.C. Horn's been hurt a lot, but when he plays, he's good. So hopefully he can stay healthy. Offensively, the O-line is exactly the same. So they're counting on those guys to be better. And, Bryce Young needs to be protected. And it's a big year for Bryce Young. I mean, the bottom line, he's the quarterback. And, they ran the ball exceptionally well. They should have a really nice duo with Hubbard's back. He had a really good year. They signed Rico Dowdle, who had a really good year in Dallas. They drafted Trevor Etienne in the 4th round. Again, not really a throwaway pick. So they're going to have 3 backs. But the key is really going to be the O-line and Bryce Young. Can they control the depth of the pocket so that he can feel comfortable throwing the football? This is a classic case where if the O-line struggles and Young struggles, McMillan will not put up numbers. And then people are going to say, oh, he's overrated. They shouldn't have drafted him. You know how that works, Buck.
Yeah.
But if he can be protected and throw from the pocket, then he'll comfortable playing. That's an unknown right now in my view.
Yeah, it definitely looked like you felt a bit more confident watching them later in the season, but again, not
Yeah,
many people watching Carolina late into the season, given how difficult the start of their year was. But some promise there, and things for Dave Canales and his staff to continue to build upon. We'll finish with Atlanta, the smallest draft class in the division, 5 players. One of them, a couple of SEC players. In fact, 4 of the 5 guys out of the rather 3 of the 5 guys out of the SEC, and James Pierce being one of them, who they traded back up into the first round to acquire the pass rusher. Jalen Walker, the linebacker out of Georgia as well. Xavier Watts, a fun safety from Notre Dame. Billy Bowman Jr., another safety from Oklahoma, and they finish it off in the 7th round. They went from the 4th to the 7th without a draft pick, Greg, where they picked up Jack Nelson, the offensive tackle out of Wisconsin. The quarterback situation in Atlanta seems to be Michael Penix and Kirk Cousins as a backup. And obviously we know what the potential of what Atlanta's offense brings to the table. But I
yeah.
wonder how you view them on both sides of the ball right now, because it's tough to kind of figure out the direction that they're heading.
Well, I think they'll be fine on offense. Penix, look, it's a small sample, but Penix played extremely well at the end of the year. That final game, he was very good. He'll be the starting quarterback. There's no question there. I think Bijan Robinson is truly special. I mean, for instance, have said, I'm on record, we don't know until Ashton Jeanty plays in the league, but I thought Bijan Robinson was a better prospect coming out of Texas than
Mm.
Ashton Jeanty is coming out of Boise State. Bijan Robinson, and then I saw him. I don't know if you got to see him. Were you at the Super Bowl? You were not, were you?
I was there for a day. It was just
Yeah,
a
yeah.
quick in
I
and
saw
out for
Bijan
me.
Robinson. Yeah, I saw Bijan Robinson in street clothes making the rounds on Radio Row. I couldn't believe how big that man is. But anyway, he's a terrific back, one of the best in the league. Their O line is basically the same as it was. Um, the issue for these last number of years, and who knows, is Kyle Pitts. I mean, they don't really have a tight end that they can count on. And Pitts was a high first round pick, and his college tape was off the charts. I can't tell you what the issue is, but that's been a problem for them. Pitts has not really been a productive player at the tight end position. They do some really good things on offense. I thought the way they used Drake London a year ago was outstanding. It got him to be a high volume target. Um, Darnell Mooney got hurt, but he's a really good wide receiver. The key is defense, and they knew that. That's why the whole draft, essentially, until the end, was defense. They could not rush the quarterback a year ago. They simply could not do that. So now they brought in Jeff Ulbrich to be the DC. They drafted Jalen Walker from Georgia, who I thought his best trait was rushing the quarterback, not
Mm.
playing stack backer. And I think that's how they'll line him up. He'll be an on the ball player. Obviously, James Pierce, he's a pass rusher. They even brought in Leonard Floyd later in his career, obviously, but he's a pass rusher. So they knew what their weakness was, Buck, and they knew they needed to address it, and they did. And again, you never know with rookies, so we're not going to sit here and say those guys will be great from day one, but they clearly drafted 2 players in the first round and they traded up to get Pierce that are pass rushers. That's the strength of what they do. And Xavier Watts, he could step right in and start next to Jesse Bates because they don't have Justin Simmons anymore. Although Jordan Fuller's always been a really solid player, he could end up winning the job early. And Terrell's one of the best corners in the league. He's probably an unknown because that defense hasn't been very good, but he's one of the best corners in the league, especially playing man coverage.
Yeah, they're just trying to make life easier on their secondary. Certainly, I mean, God knows, Greg, they haven't had like I know Vic Beasley had a statistically impressive rookie season there, but never
Right.
really panned out as a first round pick. And I mean, I struggle to find a dominant Falcons pass rusher in my memory since like John Abraham. I know Grady Jarrett was a
Wow.
good defensive player for a
Yeah,
long
yeah,
time, but it's
yeah.
been a while in Atlanta
It's
since
been a
they've
long
had some
time.
horses up front.
Yeah, well, the key, like I said, Walker to me, the best trait he has is rushing the quarterback. Pierce is one of those guys. I mean, you may know more about him because he went to Tennessee, and I'm sure you spent a lot of time on the radio talking about him. And there's probably a lot of people in your area that know him, and therefore you've learned about him. You know, he's got major traits. I mean, when I saw him at the combine in person, 6'5", 245, lean, quick, athletic, explosive. He's kind of everything you want. But the fact that he was drafted where he was tells you that something bothered teams. Now,
Mhm.
I don't know what that is. I don't know James Pierce, but something bothered teams because guys like that look like Pierce, whose strength is rushing the quarterback, don't usually last until the 25th or 26th pick in the draft.
Yeah, agreed. And there was both football character stuff, and then I think teams, wanted him to test a little better than he actually did, than he ended up doing at the combine. There were some things that were, of course, impressive, and to your point, he's a physically impressive player, but I think that they were just a little higher based on expectation, and he didn't have a great final year at Tennessee. He
Right.
was an above average player for certain, but not a spectacular player the way that he was heralded before the season start. But we know how those preseason
Right,
expectations.
right, right.
Greg, always a pleasure when we get together next. We'll be talking a little bit of AFC North, always a fascinating division, a highly competitive division, and God knows the quarterback situation in Cleveland has taken up enough oxygen at this point. But we'll spend a little more time on the other three teams as well, and I look forward to getting you in town for mandatory minicamp, my friend.
Yeah, looking forward to it. It's a couple of weeks away, and I'll be back in Nashville. And looking forward to spending a little time with you, with the guys, and being around the team. And it should be fun.
Always good to talk some shop. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Buck.